الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على محمد النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام وكفى بها نعمة، ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على النبي المبعوث رحمة للعالمين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم واجعلنا منهم آمين. Inshallah, today we will have a discussion on some of the issues pertaining to the Ummah of utmost importance given the circumstances. We'll talk about Gaza and we'll talk about the Middle East. And for Gaza, many of you have shown in the past few weeks the pain that we as an ummah feel for our brothers and sisters who are in Gaza without supplies, without food, without medicine for more than 10 weeks. And for those who say, how can we help? Besides, of course, the dua. And again, this shows that this sense of ummah is well and alive. And if this on a smaller circle or a smaller level scale in a place like here, you can also see the feelings and the reaction of the ummah around the world. And even beyond that, the reaction of those who sympathize with the cause of Palestine and the cause of the people of Gaza. As you know, there was a time where there was a ceasefire, where a number of hostages in Gaza were exchanged with a few hundred prisoners in the Israeli jails, and supplies were allowed into Gaza. And there was supposed to be a discussion on the next stage. But what was clear from the beginning is there are certain norms, what we call in Arabic sunan, that do not change. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mentioned some of those in the Quran. When He talked in the Quran about the habits of the people that live now in Palestine, He said in the Quran, كُلَّمَا عَاهَدُوا عَهْدًا نَبَذَهُ فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ. That this has been the tradition of those people whom were brought by the colonial rulers of the Muslim world at that time from different parts of the world and put them in Palestine, kicking out more than 750,000 Arabs, Christians and Muslims from Palestine, sending them to Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, and other parts of Palestine, giving them the arms and the monetary support, getting rid of the quote-unquote Jewish problem that they had in Europe by sending them to Palestine. And although as Muslim Ummah, we need to learn our lessons when the Quran says, whenever some of them make an agreement, others will come and break it. And this does not, in fact, or should not be news to us. We have seen the Oslo Agreement, clearly making so many agreements after Oslo, and they will break one after other, after other, after other, because ultimately, and some of them have explicitly or expressly says this in a clear fashion, that Oslo is dead. It has been dead before it was born. It was born dead, because they have no intention of giving anything of value to the people of Palestine. So when this issue comes of what is after the ceasefire, it became clear that for them, they would need to introduce a new reality. And the new reality that they want to introduce is not related to winning a war in Gaza. I mean, this should be clear for everyone. Politicians, intelligence services in Israel, and former officials and former politicians would say the same thing. What is it that you're talking about winning? So the war was resumed to keep the coalition intact, to keep the ruling coalition intact. This is the most right-wing coalition in the history of the Zionist entity. The most right-wing. You find the religious parties that are part of the coalition, they have their own interests of milking the country for money, for their own constituency, who spend all their life studying the Talmud and the Torah. They do not work, they do not get into the army, and they just live because basically they have enough votes to keep the government running and previous government running, since there are too many parties. And they will be there in condition to get money for their institutions. On the other side, you find the extreme Zionists who clearly say their objective is to empty Gaza from its residents. They are not hiding this. They are saying it clearly. We need to put plan in action and remove the people of Gaza from Gaza, and we need to go and resettle in Gaza and establish settlements for the Zionists in Gaza. And then you have the secular parties that are also there, but they have lost clout in the last 25 years or so. So within the government, there are extremist, right-wing Zionists who are pushing for this solution. Get all the people of Gaza out of Gaza, annex the West Bank to Israel, so there's nothing that's called Palestine or even Palestinian Authority, and even eventually get rid of the people in the West Bank. Send them to Jordan and send them to wherever they want to go. So this is the composition of the government that is there. The religious parties do not really care for what would happen much in this regard in Gaza, as long that they keep their own rights. What they want is the money for their own constituency, and they do not want to be part of the army. And some of the rabbis clearly said, we will never accept to be part of the army, even if we have to leave the country. Even if we have to leave the country. And some of them clearly distinguish between Zionism and Judaism. There were clashes in Beit Shemsha. This is a hotbed of the very religious Haredim, part of the Jewish population. In fact, they raised the Palestinian flags where they live. And last week they had big clash with Ibn Ghafir when he went to their hometown. And Ibn Ghafir came publicly and said, how in the world that I get this treatment inside my country? Now, the bulk of the people are still secular, and they want to live and let others live. Those people are hurt big time with the continuation of the war. In fact, the statistics that are in the Israeli media is 20% of the families of the reserve have seriously considered divorce since October 7. 20%. And that many of the families of the soldier who are part of reserve have mental illnesses, have issues that get them to go and look for medical service in this regard. We have also part of this secular people, those who are trying to flee the country. Many of them were caught in Tel Aviv airport trying to leave when they were called for service. And you know that the army is a very small number. It's 100,000 plus. Because the Jewish population is around 7.5 million. 7.5 million out of the 10 million. There are about 2 million plus who are Arabs, Christians and Muslims, mostly Muslims. And there is numbers who are Druze and others in this regard. So you would see that making the war long is not in the interest of the bulk of the Israelis. Neither the religious parties, because they will not have enough money to milk the society and the government, nor in the bulk of the people who are secular, who went there mostly not because of Aqidah conviction. They went there, as some put it, for clean air, subsidized housing, subsidize this, subsidize that. And we have seen also an internal war on the issues that they are trying to raise of who can immigrate to Palestine from among the Jews around the world and get immediate citizenship or have a passport there. And those people who oppose the immigration of those who are their grandfather from one side or the other is Jewish, they are saying, look, many of those come, mostly they are non-Jews, and they come and get some benefits, and they go back to Russia. And Lieberman, who represent the Russian, more than 1 million came in the 90s, and they're still coming also from Ukraine and other places. He stood and says, at least those Russians stand up and fight for the country. Meaning, you guys, you take the money and you are not fighting. So anyway, all these things, complication, the resistance in Gaza are taking these things in account. That this country cannot sustain longer war after what the country went through. The economy is suffering. They are taking on more and more debt. Their startups is way below what they used to be. Most important, their international status have deteriorated seriously, to the point that even if things goes back and normal, it will take years, if ever, long time for the image to come back. And along the same line, the resistance also is noticing that their clout in the US is an issue. Some of you are aware that 2 weeks ago, there was a proposed law in this country, in Congress, to introduce laws that will punish those who are, quote unquote, anti-Semitic, or they speak out or try to boycott Israel. And when this bill was introduced, the Zionists and their supporters in the US, they were very high, as if they were on drugs. We got it. Now there is, a proposed law. And all of this is, again, related to what's going on in Gaza. Because around the world, this become an issue. At the universities, this become an issue. At companies, big companies, from Facebook to Google to Microsoft to others, it's becoming an issue. Even in government agencies, an issue. To the point some big companies are writing explicitly saying, if you have any symbol, on your email or in your desk or at your social media post, take it out. And we do not want discussion on political issue, and so on and so forth. So realizing all these issues, they were very happy that we are close enough to have a law, which means that eventually, if somebody would speak about Gaza, you would be punished by law. Because those Zionists claim that they are, as usual, the victims. So every day they kill 100, 200 people, and they still call themselves victims. They have people without food for more than 10 weeks, and they call themselves the victims. They have destroyed hospitals, and they call themselves victims. I mean, a latest example is when Trump was in the Middle East, suddenly they went and bombed this hospital. And it was very vicious attack that killed many people. And they came and said, oh, we are after so-and-so. Talking about Muhammad Sinwar. And the media said, the army says we got it, and the government is saying we got it. Then say, we might not got it, we do not know. And then they come and say, oh, he was not even there. He was not even there. But the point was to send a message, since Trump was giving a talk, that now the guns are silent, and it's time to talk about trade, and this and this and that. So basically that was the response coming from Tel Aviv. This bombing of the hospital, which was really a big tragedy. And as I said, there was really no justification for it. And many of the places they attack, there is not really to come and say, oh, there are resistance there are this, there are that. Because all of this became nonsense. They said, we target this Muhammad Sinwar and Abu Ubaidah, and neither was there. Even the Israeli press saying they were not there. Eventually, initially they bought the government stories in this regard. So if you are to speak on these things, if you are to mention even some of the things in the description of Bani Israel, there'll be an issue. So what happened to this law is that some of those supporters of Trump, who are, those MAGA people, they came and said, wait a minute, if this law is, or this proposed law become a law, then anyone, meaning Christian, who say that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus or crucifixion of Jesus, you will be liable and you can go to court for this and you'll be punished. So they start putting amendments. And then they realize that, look, this is not going anywhere. And this is not in the best interest of this country. There's this minority who are trying to take over the decision making and direct this country to serve the purpose of the Zionists. No more, no less. They do not care about the United States, what's good for the United States. They only care what's good for Israel. So those Republicans came and withdrew the proposed law. End of story. Now this is also related to Gaza, because they're going to impose those laws for those who demonstrate. So if you can make a demonstration, says, I support the bill of Gaza, okay, that's okay. If you have something, written on a piece of paper that says we need to boycott Israel, you're in trouble. And they can prosecute you. But again, it's a blessing that some people realize that the Zionists wanted to take Congress on a ride, and they stopped it. So, given these circumstances that surround the issue of Gaza, the resistance understand those aspects. And they understand that time through, there is lots of suffering in Gaza, but this pressure to get the people of Gaza to submit, it's not happening. It's not happening. And that's why I said when they resumed the war about 10 weeks ago and said no more supplies, no more food, no more this, no more that, thinking that they will be able to put enough pressure, so-called, objectives of theirs that they will be achieved. Destroy the resistance, get all the hostages and this and that, and every Israeli know that this is absolute nonsense. It's not achievable. It's not coming. It can't. So they start bombing in a way that they will be killing the hostages. And that's when the population in Israel realize that really the government does not care about the hostages. Does not care about the hostages a bit. Of course, they keep saying, we want all the hostages out, we want the hostages released and this and that. But you are bombing without really knowing who is under those bombs. Now, go to the next level. In the past few weeks, the Israelis were shocked. And I mean it. They were shocked by few things that happened from this United States of America. As you know, and we have discussed this in the past, that this is a special relationship between this country and Israel. Before that, it was the British who have the special relationship. So what had happened is usually when there are issues pertaining to the security of Israel, anywhere in the Middle East, the US will consult with the Israelis on this regard. So there were a few shocks that came within a short period of time from President Trump. The first one, inviting Netanyahu to the White House and telling him, we are opening direct talks with Iran. We do not want war with Iran. We want to walk the nuclear program and other issues through dialogue. That was the first shock. Because for the past 15, 20 years, whenever a US president comes, Netanyahu would come to this president and say, we need together to bomb Iran. We need to bomb the nuclear program. We cannot let this and we cannot let that. And so far, nobody have really listened to him. Now with Trump, it's not just he's not listening to him, he went a step further saying, we do not really prefer war. We will open a dialogue. And on the side, if you know war, go and do it yourself. We are not part of it. Of course, the Israelis cannot carry this responsibility. Yes, they can bomb Iran. They can make trouble for Iran. They can have few explosions here or there in Iran. But to take on the nuclear program, that would be something major. And the Iranians promised to destroy Israel. Said, you're going to destroy us, we'll destroy you. Mutual destruction. So unless the U.S. comes with its heavy weight beside Israel, they will dare not to come and say, we'll try to have this war to destroy the nuclear program in Iran. So that was the first shock in this regard. A smaller shock was in the first meeting in front of the whole world when Trump told Netanyahu, as for Erdogan, he likes me and I like him. He's a friend of mine. And I do not want war. Whatever disagreements between you, you need to work it out. And I can be of help. That also another shock, but is a much smaller shock than the first shock. Because Erdogan has complained to the Americans, to President Trump specifically, that Israel is keeping bombing Syria when there's no country, in fact, in Syria. So that shock, as I said, was not on the same level of the first shock. But another major shock came. As you know, when the war on Gaza started, the Yemenis blocked Bab al-Mandab, that got most of the trade and ships through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And they said that any ship that belonged to the Zionists or to US, Britain, their supporters, we will bomb it and we will not allow them to pass through. And they start sending missiles 1,200 miles to the heart of Tel Aviv. And of course, how you can run a country when your workers every day expected to go underground because there's a missile coming. They cannot go to sleep because there's a missile coming. I remember when we were in Al-Aqsa in Ramadan, we were doing Fajr prayer and suddenly the sirens were all over the place. And you can hear it from Al-Aqsa Mosque. And by the time Salat was clear, what's those sirens? There was a missile coming from Yemen. So what helped the Israelis is that Biden and Britain decided to start engaging the Houthis in Yemen and bombing them. So there was this support, at least militarily, coming from the West regarding the Houthi. Suddenly, without coordinating with the Israelis, Trump came and said, we have negotiated a deal with the Houthis. The Houthis will not bomb our ships, and we will not bomb the Houthis. We will not bomb Yemen. Question was asked, is Israel part of this deal? No. This is between them and the Yemenis. Meaning the Yemenis are free to send missiles, and the Israelis are free to attack them. We have nothing to do with it. Of course, the way that Trump put it is, the Houthis called Oman and said, we are tired from this and, we want to really peace. I mean, he put it as if the Yemenis were crying. And of course, that's nonsense. It was the US that went to Oman and said, talk to the Yemenis. Because the US have no interest in fighting with Yemen. You want evidence? Look at the record of the discussion that was released between the top 18 officials of the US government about bombing Yemen, which became available for everyone to see, since they included a journalist in that discussion. So when they start the discussion, the Vice President J.D. Vance said, why should we bomb Yemen? We have nothing to do there. The Europeans are the ones who are hurting from this closure. Let the Europeans deal with it. Why we want to do the work on the bed of the Europeans? I mean, this is the Vice President of the United States. The President was not the President in the discussion, but the Defense Minister, the Secretary of State, and all of them were there. So one guy reminded him, said, oh, but the President have ordered us to bomb Yemen. So he was silent. Because basically the President have issued an order, bomb Yemen. But the fact that the Vice President is saying, what do we have to do with this? So in fact, Trump eventually said the same thing. We have nothing to do with this. They are not going to bomb our ships. We are not going to bomb them. That was the second major shock. And Netanyahu came humiliated in public saying, we will defend ourselves by ourselves. And everybody knows that is a joke. Because without the US weapons, without the US military and diplomatic cover, they would not survive long. This is what the Quran calls hablun minan nas. That those people will survive either by support from Allah, إلا بحبل من الله, أو حبل من الناس, or support from the people. And the support from the people, this habl from the nas, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, thinner and thin and thin as time goes on. That was the second major shock, beside the smaller shock that we talk about in the issue of dealing with Turkey. So Netanyahu is sending people and sometimes not sending people to negotiate, and it's becoming clear for the Americans that he's just playing around, and he is really trying to fool the US. The third major shock comes when the US announced that we have been talking and the Hamas will release the only living American Israeli armed or part of the army, Alexander Idan. He will be released. They said unconditionally. If you remember, about 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, the US tried to get him out, and they almost got the deal. But the Hamasis have asked, who have him, asked for a high price. Too many Palestinian prisoners to be released and some other conditions. So basically the Israelis said, this is very high cost for us. We cannot take it. And the US forget about it. But they did not forget about it. They opened another channel, direct channel with Hamas. Of course, some of their officials saying indirect, but according to Hamas, the channels were direct talks. And with the encouragement of Qatar, no doubt, with the encouragement of Qatar, no doubt, send this goodwill message to Trump. They decide to release Alexander Idan. And of course, you expect this Netanyahu to come out and say, oh, it was our military pressure that got Alexander Idan out. Oh, come on. If you're military pressure, why the others one are still there? Your military pressure have nothing to do with this. It was a deal that Qatar appealed to Hamas to do it, saying that this would get things done. Not maybe on the short term, but it's at least a gesture of goodwill to the Trump administration. That was a big shock. That the Americans will go behind the Israelis, negotiate on the release of the American Israeli hostage, regardless of all the others. So basically, it's giving a signal after a signal after a signal. You are on your own. We're going to look for our own interests in this regard. Then came the news that during these times, that the US administration have decided to get the National Security Advisor to step down. And the rumors went around, basically, in the media, which later became sort of, oh, this is it. that Netanyahu was talking to this guy, the National Security Advisor, behind Trump, working with him, talking about military plans against Iran. So imagine the president is saying, we are not interested in military action. We are going to negotiate. And this prime minister goes behind his back to his national security advisor and talking about plans of war. That's why the Israeli press, when he was stepped down or when they fired him, they basically said that we have lost the cause on Iran. Now, they do not want really to embarrass themselves big time. They said, we're going to send him to be the representative at the UN. After they, forget about appointing the congresswoman to that position. And to make, trying to make fun of the word, the vice president says, we are promoting him. And anyone who knows the ABC of politics and the American politics knows that when you send somebody from being a national security advisor to being in the UN, you are really putting him way down from where he was. It's not a promotion in this regard. So this was yet another shock. And the Israeli government had to come to the public and says, we do not distinguish between Israeli citizens and those who have double citizenship. As you know, many of the reserve, a good number from the UN and the army, many of those residents in Palestine are people who carry dual citizenship. They are either, American Israelis, British Israelis, German Israelis, Ukrainian Israelis, Russian Israelis. They keep the other passport. And they keep the other passport for a reason. Because one day they may need it. This country, even the politicians and the historians are saying, not sure if this country will be there next year. Of course, they are saying this, not that the country will collapse in a year. They are saying the behavior of the government and the way the society is fighting over the judicial reform and the war in Gaza and the differences between the secular and the religious, that this country might not survive. So keeping another passport is the name of the game. If you are an Israeli citizen, you do not have another passport, they are seeking to have another passport because they do not know what next year will bring. And we have seen the moment that there will be, a real danger, many people will just bail out and go out. And, there was a study in the university a few weeks ago saying we are losing big numbers of doctors, engineers, IT people. They left the country and they are not coming back. The bulk of the tax money that was collected by the state is from those IT companies, many startups. And now they are in real jeopardy and trouble in this regard. The last shock, which was also a major shock, as Trump goes to Saudi, and guess who is coming to Saudi? It's unimaginable as of a few weeks back for those, who know the history, that suddenly Ahmed al-Shara, i.e. al-Julani, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, is in Saudi, in Riyadh, meeting in the same room with Mohammed bin Salman, with Trump, and with Erdogan. Although Erdogan was not present physically, he was communicating with them via teleconference. And just before the meeting, Trump would say in public, I am lifting the sanctions on Syria. Wow. I mean, that's big. Without consulting the Israelis. And the word went out as Trump is so mad at Netanyahu and company because they are trying to make a fool of him. They are trying to use him. They are trying even in some sense to humiliate or his position by trying to do things behind his back against his clear agenda. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. Just a week or two before that, there was this talk, oh, Trump may make a quick visit to Tel Aviv just to, keep this image of a good relation. But he did not. He went from Saudi to Qatar, from the Qatar to the Emirat. He considered a trip to Turkey for the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine. And then he decided not to go because neither Putin did not want to come, although Zelensky said that he would be there. So he left the area without visiting, and as you know, Tel Aviv is a few hundred miles, not many, from those countries. And this have shaken the image of Netanyahu among the politicians and the public. That, look, you no longer have this clout. Politically you have weakened the country. And we do not have this influence anymore. And add insult to injury, every day the Yemenis send 1 or 2 missiles targeting Tel Aviv. And you have seen that the bulk of the airlines have boycotted Tel Aviv airport in this regard. So, from the resistance perspective, how long the situation can be there? I mean, the Israelis have bombed Yemen, destroy, many vital interests in the country, and basically the Yemenis keep sending those missiles as if nothing is happening. How you deal with this situation in this regard? And what we have seen today, we were expecting a plan to resume the food supplies to Gaza. But this plan that the Israelis came up with will say that the UN have nothing to do with food distribution. NGOs have nothing to do with this food distribution. The system in Gaza is no longer will be working. We're going to bring a private company from the US to run the program in Gaza. And this program will be such that there will be 2 locations where food is available. And any Gazans who want food, he or she have to go personally to that location and get the food. And initially there will be a station in North Gaza. Same thing, if you need food, you need to go to this station in North Gaza. Eventually, the North Gaza station will close and everyone will need to go to the 2 stations in the south to get food. Now, on the surface, they are saying this will assure that Hamas will not have food. Well, but the Hamas have the hostages. So, how are you going to work this out in this regard. Plus, Hamas have money, so they can buy from the, traders. There's plenty of, people in Gaza who have wealth and who have benefited from the situation and who have stored food and supplies, and they have been selling them at high price. Hamas can buy from them. It can, in fact, take it by force if they choose. So it was clear that the issue is not really not to get food to Hamas. The issue is clearly remove people of Gaza from their residence, their homes, their towns, their camps, and concentrate them in one place in the south and one place in the north, and then close the north. After you gather them, open a corridor from the north to the south and let them go to the south, and that's called ethnic cleansing. Using the food, hunger, to ethnic cleanse Gaza, so they will be concentrated in two areas eventually, and the rest of Gaza will be empty for the Zionists to build their own settlements and to control it without resistance, without fighting, without anything, because all those Gazas are now in two big areas, north and south, and they are two big prisons, and the north prison will be transferred to the south. That was the idea. But today, some of you have seen the news, some of you might not because it came late, that the Israeli government met and said that they will allow supplies to enter Gaza based on the old system. Based on the old system. And to satisfy the right wing and the extremists among them, they said this will be temporary. Now, why the change of heart? Well, no, there's no change of heart. There are two main issues here. One is that the army itself has been talking about the need to supply Gaza with food. Why? Because they do not want to be war criminals. I mean, they have seen Netanyahu and Gallant being taken by the International Court of Justice, or the International Criminal Court. I'm sorry, that's a separate case, for war crimes. So if the army is preventing food from 2.3 million people, then people in the higher ups in the army, from the Katz, the defense minister, who's really a very, very cheap personality, who's just a shadow of Netanyahu, but the chief of the army and the people in the upper echelon of the army can be prosecuted. And we have seen in some European countries just normal soldiers, everyday Israeli soldier being trapped in his place, in his hotel, and being smuggled out of the country because the court is trying to get him and arrest him and prosecute him for war crimes. So this issue has been ongoing, but Netanyahu resisted the army all along. A second factor is people start dying from hunger in Gaza. That's a reality. Nobody denies it. Yes, we do not have thousands of people dying each day from hunger, but we are having a number of people in each location dying from hunger, babies, pregnant women who cannot support their pregnancy, and so on and so forth. If this thing is to continue, there will be challenges not just to the government in Tel Aviv, but to the US government, because everybody perceives that it's the US government that's giving them the weapons and giving them the support. And that's where pressure came from the US to do something. Now, where this something and how long is this something and this and that remain to be seen. But at least the corridors will be open to get food and supplies to Gaza as of the decision that came today in the afternoon by the Israeli press and by some international news like Axios and Al Jazeera, of course, quoting officials in this regard. So where the situation in Gaza is going, Lebed, who is the main opposition figure, usually meet with intelligence and get a briefing. He said a few days ago that we are very close to a ceasefire. Now, whether Netanyahu is playing politics with him or not, that's something that we do not know. But what we know is the bottom line for Netanyahu is keeping his government intact. And it's very important for him personally to keep out of jail, because there are few court cases against him. And until now, he have refused an investigation of the October 7. Although the army have done an investigation and major figures have stepped down, resigned, saying we take responsibility in this regard, he clashed with the head of the local intelligence service, tried to fire him. The court said you cannot fire him. And that brought another crisis. I mean, if you count the crisis that Netanyahu have went through and still kept intact, tells you that he is really have this outstanding ability to fool all around him and to tell everyone what they like to hear. But for how long? Now, the Israeli government yesterday said that they have sent yet a new delegation to Qatar, and it is serious about getting something worked out. They talk about freeing half the hostages and having, a ceasefire for 2 months, and Hamas said basically, no, such a thing we did not consider. And then the rumors. NBC will come with a rumor that 1 million Gazan will be sent to Libya. Many of you have seen this news. This is NBC. And for a few days, shock, and the Arab and the Muslim world, what's going on? And then the US Embassy yesterday issued a statement, this is baseless, there's no such a thing, and there's no such a talk. I mean, Libya itself is having wars of its own. Now, who is promoting those rumors? Of course, Israeli and Zionist sources that are giving news, and you can see some of these things even in the Israeli press, talking about things, with Qatar, and Qatar is doing this, and Qatar is doing that, and Egypt is doing this, and Egypt is doing that, and basically all of it is just rumors, no more, no less. Now, with all of this going on, we have been seeing the trip that President Trump have taken to the Middle East. And although we used, the term Middle East, that's really a British term, by the way. The British introduced such a term that basically when you talk about the Middle East, talking about Egypt and Syria and Palestine and the Zionist entity, we're talking about Iraq and the Gulf area and Iran and Turkey. That's the Middle East. It does not include, Pakistan and India and Afghanistan. That's another part of the land. But anyway, that's the term that was created by the British for this area that's called the Middle East. And from what we have learned from the trip that Trump have taken, basically, totally ignoring Egypt and totally ignoring Israel. Those two countries have been milking from the US over the years. Of course, the Israelis are milking much more than the Egyptian. And so he goes to Saudi, and then to Qatar, and then to the Emirat, and we are talking about trillions of dollars. I mean, your head spin trillions of dollars. Some people are asking where this money is going to come from. Let me just talk about Saudi. Saudi have a debt of about $400 billion. Those are not my numbers. Just go to Google, say Saudi national debt. It's $377 billion. How in the world did they end up in debt? They have money, but the money is in US banks. And you cannot come and withdraw, $100 billion one time and try to. So basically, the US says, keep the money here. You can borrow. Goes to Chase Manhattan and go to Wells Fargo and go to your own banks, and they have been borrowing with interest big time. That at the rate that it is going, this interest on those debt will start eating the bulk of their budget eventually, especially with the prices of oil coming down. So getting those countries to entice him with the trillions of dollars, and Iran realizing this part, Iran saying also, we can invest $1 trillion also. This is what appeals to him, let's appeal to him. We can invest $1 trillion in the US. And basically he takes the big, CEOs, taking with him Mark and Elon and all those people. Of course, not the head of Amazon. He was not there. And you know why he was not there. Right? Because the head of Amazon owns the Washington Post. And the Washington Post, there was a man by the name of Jamal Khashoggi, may Allah have mercy on him. He was working as a correspondent for the Washington Post. He ended up being killed and cut into pieces at the Saudi embassy in Istanbul. And the CIA said on the order of the Crown Prince. And Trump said, I have saved his ASS by the US standing behind him. So Jeff Bezos did not show up there for that reason, clearly, in this regard. So we had this Gulf leaders meeting with Trump, and bottom line is, yeah, we are giving him the money, he will give us protection. Protection, we are not talking about protecting countries, we are talking about protecting thrones. We are talking about protecting thrones. One of the noticeable things that came in the meeting of the Gulf leaders was the Emir of Kuwait saying something good. He's saying, we're glad, we are happy that the US have cut a deal with the entity in Yemen. The entity in Yemen. That we are happy that, there's a deal now, that there's no bombing, there's no thing, and, he stopped. So Ibn Salman sent him somebody saying, what did you say? You need to come back and correct yourself and say the illegitimate government in Yemen. So suddenly the Emir of Kuwait asked for, I need to speak. And he addressed the President of the United States saying, Mr. President, I erred in my statement about Yemen. What I meant to say, the illegitimate entity of Yemen. Although everybody, knows the dynamics in Yemen in this regard. Even this word, the entity in Yemen, was not good enough in this regard. So where the Middle East is heading, it's becoming more and more obvious that the US is giving more of a role to Turkey. And the meeting of Trump al-Shara, which shocked many people in Syria and beyond, and some of the statements that came, which is close to the Muharramat, talking about relationship with the Zionist entity and releasing some of the information that they have sought, the Zionists, about things in Syria from the history of Eli Cohen and others. Now they said we have the files. Who gave it to them? It's something that of interest. Some of you might not know what I'm talking about, but in 1 minute, Eli Cohen was an Israeli spy who went to Syria in the old days and said that he's a Syrian Jew. I'm sorry, he's a Syrian immigrant who, he was living in Central America, and that he came back to Syria to live and invest, and he had lots of money. So he started buying apartments and giving it to the higher up in the government and the police and the army, bringing them girls and alcohol and all sorts of things. And he became a very important personality in Damascus, to the point that they consider him to be the Syrian defense minister. But there was something that was not normal or natural at the time. There are things that are happening, and the Israelis have all the news as it happened. The secret things, the Israelis know about it. And they have no clue what's happening. Till they got some listening devices, new ones at the time from Russia. And they put those listening devices around government installations, and they found across from the defense ministry signals going to the Israeli intelligence in Palestine. And they kept approaching until they found Eli Cohen, who was an Israeli spy. He was not Arab. He was not a Syrian. He was not a big investor. He was a big spy. And he was executed by the Syrian government. So now they are saying even his files, thousands of pages, suddenly end up in Tel Aviv today. And people are asking how. Not to mention other things. So there's no doubt that Al-Shara have given too much or infinite trust to Erdogan. And Erdogan has been running the show all along in this regard. So Turkey is to play a major role in the coming years, at least as long as Trump is there. Trump is talking about even getting more and more US troops out of Syria. They are protecting, quote unquote, the Kurds. And he wants Turkey to take over. Turkey wants Syria to be intact. The Israelis want Syria to be divided. The US is supporting Turkey's position in this regard. And as far as Iran is concerned, it looks like the Iranian top officials are saying they are flexible in talking about the high enriched uranium, either putting a limitation or getting rid of the highly enriched. And the US can use this and saying basically this diffuses the Iranian nuclear program and establish some kind of a relationship, and that will be big change and shift in the Middle East. Because until now, the major power in the Middle East is Israel, Turkey, and Iran. Israel is bombing Lebanon, bombing Gaza, bombing the West Bank, bombing Iraq, bombing Syria, bombing Lebanon, bombing Yemen. I mean, this is only in the last year. They bombed all those countries. And they want to divide Syria again. But with those changes, Turkey definitely is getting the support of the US, clearly. And you can see that this Ahmad Shara, who had $10 million on his head only a few months ago, suddenly he's talking to the President of the United States of America. I mean, I have seen an image. It's a shocking image. 7 months ago and last week. In the 7 months ago, Abu Muhammad al-Julani is riding a cheap motorcycle somewhere in northern Syria, and you do not know, in fact, who's riding it and for what purpose. And then you see a tie and a suit, and meeting with who? With Muhammad ibn Salman and President Trump and Erdogan. That tells you a lot in this regard. Whether Syria can make it to establish and build a country is to be determined between what will happen between Israel and Turkey. Syria has no say, absolutely no say. The country does not have an army, does not have an economy, and basically they are starting to build from scratch. Before Syria has a position in the Middle East, no doubt, no more. Egypt is very weak because economically they are drained. Qatar just gave them $7.5 billion, and it's just a change. Money just keep going down the drain in this regard. Libya have the internal fighting. Iraq cannot settle the issues between the Shiite militias and the government, and they cannot be separated or independent from Iran. Jordan in the middle of all this thing and not to know where to go and what to do, because basically any move in the area, any change would affect them. And the Yemenis are really there saying we'll keep bombing until the Gaza blockade stop and the war on Gaza stop in this regard. This gives you a view of really how things are transforming in this regard, where Turkey will start playing a more major role in the Middle East, and the prospect of Iran also getting into this position is there, with competition over the Gulf and the money of the Gulf. And of course, the US wants to be the one who takes the bulk of this money of the Gulf, if not all of it, in this regard. Let me also make it clear there's no strategic difference or conflict between the US and Iran. What Iran wants from the US is to have its own space. When the Shah was ruling Iran, Iran was the major policeman in the Gulf. Iran thinks of itself as a country that inherited a civilization that is thousands of years old, and Islam became part of their civilization in this regard. So they see themselves as people who deserve to have a say in the area, a position in the area, their own space in the area of the Middle East, and to have a major role in what is going on. That's the conflict between the US and Iran, because the US does not want any competition in this area. And Turkey is not pretending or trying to compete with the US in this regard. Turkey is trying to walk through the US with the agreement of the US on whatever they want to achieve. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring the khair and the good for the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give guidance of this Islam to humanity, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate the suffering of the Muslims in Gaza and Syria and Sudan and Pakistan and India and beyond. Allahumma ameen. Have a time for a question and or a question and a comment. Yes, Sahid. Right. 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 Yeah, the brother asking about what we said earlier, there was a proposed legislation in the Congress to introduce laws that will punish people who are so quote-unquote anti-Semitic. And with that, people who are anti-Israel or people who call for a boycott of Israel for companies or for universities, and that would be punishable in this regard. And I said at the time that the supporters of Trump in Congress, and many of them really are right-wing, Christians who have their own view, they came and said, wait a minute, if an American Christian will say the Jews killed Jesus, then you're going to go to jail for it. He said, no, we will not accept this. So the supporters of the bill, the Zionists, said, okay, we can have amendment. And then somebody else said, but this and this and that, and then they realized this will not fly. The Congress, the establishment and the Congress realized that this is not in the best interest of this country or free speech, and this can go, to the Supreme Court, the issues can be reduced, and it may not fly in the Senate, so they withdrew the whole legislation. And for that we say Allahu Akbar. Because really for the first serious time, we have seen, this people in the Congress have backbone saying basically we will not be tools in the hands of the Zionists. This is what the Zionists want them to do. So you can, inshallah, Google this information and see, because as Muslims we need to be aware of these things, because it would affect the way that us and our children function in this country. Not to mention, talking about issues in the Bible or, there are issues that are being discussed. If you are to approve this law, then if you give a speech in a synagogue, in a church, and talk about Jews and Isa alayhi salam and this and this, you can be persecuted for that. And that's why they withdrew this thing. Plus, they realized that the Zionists are thinking of themselves that they own this country and they would not go for this. Inshallah, time for the adhan.